Welcome back to the 1A podcast. I am Josh Squires, your host, and joining me as always is my co-host, Josh Fleming. Thanks for being here, Josh.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here as always.
And our special guest, Mary Louise Bowers. Thanks for being with us.
Happy to be here with y'all.
Okay, Josh, we are continuing to talk about the various sins that we see people struggle with in our various ministry areas. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, today, actually the next two episodes, we're going to be discussing sins of the tongue. Things that we do with our mouths that are dishonoring to God, the way we speak. And so today we're going to be looking at some of those, not all of them, but certainly some that I think people in all our ministry areas on some level going to struggle with these. And so just to introduce the topic, it's grumbling, complaining, and gossiping that we're going to try to cover today.
Okay.
Three, pretty big sins that if you've been around at all in your life, you know these are tough.
Yeah.
So why don't we start definitions? What are we talking about with these different things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all three of them, if you were to draw a diagram of all three, there'd be significant overlap between these three. I think they might have some different emphasis, right? So gossiping is talking negatively about somebody, especially to another person where you're breaking some essence of secrecy or confidentiality. Grumbling seems to be more about the person in your own circumstance, complaining just the circumstance, not necessarily against the person. But all of them are kind of a negative attitude voiced in a way that seems to be inappropriate.
Yeah, that's good. Some sort of discontentment or annoyance about another person or a situation in your life.
Yeah.
There's something, and you've got to let people know about it.
Yeah.
And I guess actually maybe the gossiping has to be verbalized, but the other two could probably be internal as well, right? It could be sort of that inner monologue of your mind thinking, complaining to yourself, right? These could be, they don't necessarily have to be out loud to someone else. Why do we struggle with these? What do you think? What's the root?
Well, and just as I was hearing you give that back to me, I was thinking, not all negative talk about our negative experiences is bad.
Gotcha.
If you were to look at the
make
Psalms,
a distinction there.
Yeah, exactly. You were to look at the Psalms, you're going to see a lot of negative talk.
That's right.
Why is it that the evil flourish? Why is it that your people seem to be the ones that are crushed? Psalm 88, which I use frequently as a counselor because it is the darkest psalm in the Psalter and therefore kind of helps people to understand this is an experience in the believing life. It seems to be a song of complaint to the Lord. So it's also what you're doing with it. Like, are you taking the negative circumstances and the hurt and the pain and the anger to the Lord to be healed, to a friend that they could bear your burden and help apply the gospel? Or are you just stoking the anger and allowing the sadness and whatever to become bitterness, right? Rather than trying to apply healing.
That's a helpful nuance.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, not all negative speak.
Right.
Because sometimes in Christian circles, we think whoever rushes to accept God's will, even in difficult circumstances, they're the most Christian. Whoever gets there first, right? and that just doesn't seem to be the way Scripture plays itself out.
And it's helpful even to think that God's Word gives us a vocabulary.
Yeah.
Like here's even in the Psalter predominantly, but here's how it looks to do this in a way that's actually honoring to God in some level because it's showing you how to do this appropriately. That's a helpful nuance there for sure.
Mary Louise, do you think that that's a good definition of those three, and would you add any nuance there?
Yeah, one of the things that was coming to my mind is when you look up complaint in the dictionary, there are actually a couple definitions, and one has to do with just being like, woe is me, life is so hard and bad. But the other is like you can go to your physician with a complaint, right? My stomach has been hurting, my ear has been aching, which is a complaint, but it's really almost like productive complaint.
Right. Yeah.
And it makes me think of, there's a hymn, and one of the lines is, "Can the ears of sovereign grace ring deaf when I complain?" And I think that is so much of what we're bringing to God is really, it's productive. It's sanctifying for us and strengthens our relationship with our Father who asks us to bring our burdens to Him.
Yeah.
And so some of it is that motivation, like, am I doing this really to move forward? Is this a complaint that is done with hopes of healing and in a productive manner? Or is this just, what I would really tie into grumbling?
Yeah.
Like, am I just murmuring with discontent?
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction. And oftentimes, I may have said this on this podcast before, but Christians sometimes, even in their prayer life, feel like we can only give the best.
Right.
Our prayer life has to look like our Instagram feeds. I say that as if I've ever seen Instagram or know what an Instagram feed is, but from what I understand, people always give their best kind of on Instagram, the flashy, what looks good and all of that, versus giving an earthy and real. And so I do want to make sure that we say, hey, like, you can take your complaints, even your boredoms, to the Lord in prayer. That's totally fine. It's allowing it to sit and stew and create resentment towards the Lord, towards others, that doesn't lead towards that hope and healing that I think is
That's good.
Yeah,
the most important feature.
When you look at the Psalms, and a lot of these Psalms of lament or complaint, you'll notice that they end with a really positive, but still I have hope in the Lord, or, something similar. Right. And I always love that, because sometimes it's really hard for me to get there. And so I appreciate that example of we do pour ourselves out to Him, and He does listen and bends His ear to us. But He doesn't, He wants to, He doesn't design to leave us in despair.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's a good point. And we wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't possible for us to voice these in inappropriate manners.
Yeah.
So what does it look like for me, or for any other Christian for that matter, to do this in a sinful way? How does our complaint, how does it turn from just a complaint that I'm bringing to the Lord, or or to the physician, to the great physician, as you might say, so you can know what's going on in my life and address and not leave me in that? How do I get from there to all of a sudden, now I'm doing this in a sinful manner, and it's dishonoring to Him?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things. One, and there's that old adage, have you prayed about it as much as you've talked about it? It's always convicting to me. It just is. Right? Have I taken this to the Lord in a way that's trying to allow that hurt or that fear or that sadness or that anger to be allayed by Him, by His Word, by His Spirit, and by His people? Or am I using it in such a way in order to make myself feel better about me, in a way to nurse my pride, in a way to talk negatively about others? So oftentimes when we're talking about grumbling and complaint, we're talking about somebody or some context that we don't think is fair, right, or just. And we really don't have any desire to see that resolved, to do the hard thing of going to the person or to talk into the context or to do the persevering in the Lord in that moment. We just want ourselves to feel better. And so we talk about it, and we talk about it in a demeaning way that often then allows us to feel above whatever the person or circumstance is, right? Rather than being able to take something difficult and humbly submitting to the Lord and offering it up in prayer. I don't understand this. I don't understand why you would do this. I don't understand that decision. This is frustrating. This is sad. This is angering. And yet, as Mary Louise was saying, and yet my hope is in you. You're sovereign. You're good. I know these things to be true. So the negative tends to cast aspersions, especially on God's character. He doesn't know what He's doing. He's not good. He's not loving. He's left me. He's not with me, right? And the other is, this is terrible. This is difficult. I do not like it. And I know you're good.
Right.
I know you love me. I know you're somehow working this out for my better and the better of those who love you.
Can I ask a follow-up question of the counselor? So our temptation, right? Like if I'm mad at Josh Squires, my temptation is
Happens all the time.
Right. My temptation is to run to Josh Fleming and say, "You wouldn't believe what Josh Squires did the other day."
It.
You know,
I believe it.
but But really, a better remedy is for me to say to Josh Squires, here, I'm struggling with this, or to voice my complaint to you. When we have I'll say a complaint against our husband, your spouse, friend, parent, family member, what's a good way to approach that can prevent this sort of grumbling and gossiping?
Yeah, I mean, one, we have to be those who are willing to have good conflict. And that's tough. It's tough in general because conflict always comes with a cost, and we already feel hurt. And so to go in and to be wise and mature, to have good, healthy conflict in the midst of feeling hurt is really difficult. Secondly, we feel hurt from them. So then to be vulnerable by telling them, hey, you've hurt me, when already I feel like you hurt me, maybe it seemed on purpose, maybe it was on accident. Now I'm going to be vulnerable and give you a chance to hurt me again.
Right.
That to us is counterintuitive. And so a lot of times we want to come back. Either we want to retreat and not deal with it and just talk to other people, or we want to come back over the top just as heavy as what it felt like we were hurt. And so to be able to come to them directly, humbly, and just say, hey, this thing that was said or done really hurt me, and I think was not right, and here's why. I'm open to you telling me kind of your side of things. And if people are genuinely interested, there's a whole communication cycle that I teach in counseling that can help people get to that particular level where they're known and understood. But it's just that willingness to listen to others and to know others and to be known in the midst of that I think is helpful and keeps us from just griping and complaining with somebody else. Now, there are times when, I've been a jerk to you, which wouldn't be the first time, I think, and you have to go to Fleming and say, Squires was kind of a jerk. Am I misreading this? Mm-hmm. Was that his intention, do you think? Do you think it was wrong? I'm not looking to gossip against Squires. I'm looking to check my own heart. Right? And one of the ways I know that is you and I don't get into this complaining session against Squires. It's more, I saw this, I read this, I felt this. Is that accurate? Yeah, I think that's accurate. Okay, help me with what you think would be appropriate, because sometimes when we're hurt and wounded, we need someone who's outside, who's not hurt and wounded, to help us think about how we address it, right? But you also have to be careful about to whom you go when you want that sort of burden bearing. Oftentimes, for marriages, for example, if a spouse offends another spouse and they go to their friends, what do their friends have a tendency to do? Well, their friends have a tendency, desire to be like, oh, well, that jerk. How dare he act that way to you, right? And what that does is it stokes your pride and your woundedness. And yeah, that's right, my self-righteousness. And what instead you want to find those incredibly rare but invaluable friends who will say, gosh, that sounds like he was inconsiderate. And you probably need to go and talk to him, but also be humble and kind and make sure you're showing godly character as you go and confront him on this.
It does seem like sin, the sinful reaction, as it often does, is it promises, in the short term, this is going to make you feel better. Like even the illustration you were using, ML, made me think, Squires offends you, you want to come to me, and in some way it'll feel good to unload on him to someone else. But it actually, in the long run, and this is, again, what we know about sin in general, but it doesn't pay back on its promises. It won't actually solve the issue of the tension and the hurt and the pain in your relationship. And so it leaves you bankrupt over time.
Well, and more than that too, because then it's like, if I know you'll talk about Squires behind his back, then why wouldn't you talk about Mary Louise behind her back?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great point.
So in the moment, it feels actually really good. The easiest way for relationships to form is two against another. It's one of the reasons why middle school is terrible for all people.
I always tell middle schoolers, I'm like, it gets better.
It does.
Like, it really does.
It does get better. And it's because in middle school, you're moving out of my relational network as primarily family to peers. But the first step is you and me against that dude, or you and me against that girl, right? And so everyone feels picked on at some point, and everyone's scared to death of being picked on, versus more mature relationships, usually middle high school to early college, are you and I around the thing we both enjoy.
Sure.
Right? Which is about us, not against a third. So relationally, it's always super easy for us to align against something we don't like, but it's also super brittle. It actually can't handle very much. When there's a crisis, you're not likely to show up and get involved with me if the only thing our relationship is based on is that Fleming's a jerk, right? If instead our relationship's based on you like me, I like you, and all of a sudden I need help, you're likely to jump in, right? So it does. There's a promise here that sin makes that you'll feel better, and you'll be closer to someone. You'll be known by them in the midst of this. How awesome is that? You feel hurt and rejected by this other person, and now you're going to be known and closer to that person over there.
Right.
But it's incredibly brittle and it's incredibly fragile.
That's good. I want to talk a little bit about the vertical dimension here as well. Like, it's easy. I mean, I think we can obviously see how we're hurting those around us by grumbling, complaining, gossiping about them, whatever it is. How is our complaining, and I guess we talked about this at the beginning a little bit in terms of the appropriate complaints to God. How is our grumbling, complaining, even gossip offensive to God in that vertical relationship, stepping away from the horizontal just for a moment?
Yeah. First off, I think we need to recognize that it is an offense to God. In Romans 1:29, Paul lists a group of sins that evidence that God has given these people over to themselves, over to the lusts of their hearts, right? And what is in that list? We often pull out the sexual sins that are listed there, but actually gossip and slander are in there, right? That's a sign that we don't actually trust God, that we don't actually think that he's sovereign and control over all things, or that we would know better.
Oh, yeah.
And that we would do better if we were in control. And so complaining, and it's really two dimensions. One is I want to be in control of all things. I want to be the one that's setting all things up rather than trusting God in this situation. And secondly, rather than being vulnerable before the Lord, going to him in prayer and saying, this really hurts. I don't understand why you would allow this to happen, which is a hard, vulnerable prayer to pray, right? And so instead of being known like that, which is then what allows the gospel to really resonate in the soul, when all of a sudden you see resolution later, right? I don't want to be vulnerable with a God who's going to allow that in my life, right? And so there's a sense of mistrust that you begin to fester.
Right. That lack of faith in his good purposes, his working all things for his glory and also good for his people. Yep. I think so often in our prayer life, we want to take God both the problem and the solution. If I can just get him to check this off, that I've kind of already got it worked out. But just coming to him with the problem seems like, oh, can I really trust you to work this out in some way?
It's a great point, because it is a lot of times we come with a problem and a requested solution.
That's right. Yeah. You just rubber stamp this.
Yeah. Here we'll get this going. Is my problem, and I'd really like you to solve it in in this way that I've chosen.
Yes, which is really good for me.
It works out best.
It works out really good.
Yeah.
One of the definitions I had for grumble, or that I found for grumble, was to mutter in discontent. And when you were talking about Romans 1, Josh, that was kind of coming to my mind. It's this idea that we are discontent, we're dissatisfied.
Right.
And so this grumbling, complaining, gossip comes out of this dissatisfaction and discontentment. I mean, where do y'all find that the word encourages you to the opposite, to contentment, to satisfaction?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is going to be Philippians 4. Right? When it tells you to think on all these things, good, right, beautiful, and true, those sort of things, in order that the peace of God may be in you, the sort of peace that surpasses understanding, that allows a certain amount of peace and contentment, despite difficult circumstances. And in this case, it is a lot of relational conflict that's going on in Philippians, which is what causes a lot of us to grumble and complain in the first place. So I think that's where my mind tends to go. And the second thing is the promise there that it goes beyond understanding. So often, especially in our complaints, we want to understand everything. I'll stop complaining when I understand why this is happening and I can see its resolution.
I feel called out right now.
Do you want to take that knife out of your back and put it back away?
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so the fact that he promises a peace that surpasses understanding, we don't have to know. We don't have to know how it's all coming together, and yet you can still have peace. Right? So I think that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think of our God being the God of all comfort, the Father of mercies. I think of him being that source of joy and ultimate satisfaction. I think of Psalm 73, whom have I in heaven but you? Besides you, I desire nothing on earth. If we find, if ultimately we learn to find our contentment, our satisfaction in life in God and in him alone above all things, then suddenly the circumstances of our lives that may actually be worthy of some level of a complaining or grumbling or something, but those things, the things of this world, just they grow dim, right? You say, well, look, this is a problem, and I'll take that to the Lord, but ultimately I find all my greatest satisfaction and hope in him anyway. So I think that is that idea of just turning to him. Another thing I think about, and I found this in Jonathan Edwards recently, this idea of like, it was either in his resolutions, it might have actually just been in his diaries, but it was, or a diary entry, but it's this idea of like thinking myself not as my own, which he's probably getting from Calvin, and then letting say all my circumstances, I won't allow myself to grumble and complain in them because it's I don't hold myself as my own even being. Like I'm God's and he can do what he wants with me. And that was, even reading that, I was like, ooh, that's good. Not sure I'm there yet. Yeah. I was like, if you could look at yourself and say, it's easy for me to look at someone else and say, well, Josh Squires belongs to the Lord. And God can do what he wants with him for good or for ill or that sort of thing. But for me, it's like, ooh, just do the good stuff.
Yep.
But I think that's a lot of it. And that was another thing I thought of it as we were preparing for this as well, is sometimes how I view others. Maybe we mentioned this earlier with the fairness idea, but like, how do we respond to good things in other people's lives? Like,
great point.
Grumbling and complaining can be, the question to ask yourself is, how do I respond to bad things in my life? Maybe. But a complimenting question could be, how do I respond to the good things in your life?
Right.
Because if the good things in your life make me mad and jealous and make me want to go gossip about, can you believe she's getting this and this and this?
Yeah.
It's time to check my heart.
Yep.
And go back to those promises that we were talking about.
Yes. It can be so hard to rejoice with those who rejoice. And I was even thinking like, full disclosure, because, we're here with friends, right?
Right. And no one's watching, so it doesn't matter.
But I'm a 42-year-old woman, and so there's a lot of conversation about, like, people are freaking out because they're starting to see evidence of age, right? And so there's a lot of conversation about who's aging well, who doesn't look like they're aging, who's had what done to prevent aging, who looks terrible and old, and we're all trying we're all trying to not be that person at our high school reunions, right?
Wait, this entire episode was really just so that she could rebuke me about how I know now.
But there's all this discontentment, and so then guess what the discontentment does?
Yeah.
It breeds gossip about what other people are doing or how they look or whatever.
Yeah.
You're grumbling about your own self and not really responding to the biblical idea of our gray hair being a crown.
Yeah.
Do y'all have anything you see? I don't want to stop your question, Josh, but like, is there something you see in men, similarly, where there's something that really breeds discontentment? Obviously, this isn't the only example for women, but
I would say vocational success.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things
Yeah.
similar to what you're saying
Yeah.
for the women that show up in men's lives as well. Vocational success, who's keeping in shape as they age, who's Who's got the family that looks? I mean, I think a lot of these are crossover, but whose kids are best at baseball or soccer or whatever, football, whatever the sport is that folks are interested in. There's lots of ways this shows up in the lives of men as well. And I think a lot of them may be similar, just dressed a little bit differently than they are maybe in the lives of the women that you're discussing.
Yep.
Do you think praying for people, I mean, is that part of the solution at least? That if we are praying for others as we see good in their lives, like, I thank you so much for the way you've abundantly blessed them.
Yeah. Praising God for,
Yes. And praying for the things. I often say there are two types of people whose problems you can see and people whose problems you cannot see.
But there are no people without problems.
No people without problems.
Yeah.
But, perhaps praying for somebody's unseen problems or unspoken problems might be part of the solution.
Yeah, because in a world that is full of social media, and you were talking about this earlier, like the Instagram feeds, often people are only presenting the good, right? And so you don't see any of the problems in their lives if that's where you're getting information about them. Not that, but my point is, you can look at someone's life and think, well, they've just got it all together.
Yeah.
But then you realize, but they do have problems in their life too. And so I'm going to pray for those that I don't see through their Instagram feed or even through how they present themselves in our interactions. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I think one of the virtues you're looking for as a Christian when it's like, how do I help celebrate somebody else's successes, is you're trying to inculcate daily that habit of humility, not thinking less of ourselves, but thinking of ourselves less. So that as I see the grid of your success, I'm not filtering it through me.
Oh, yeah.
The successes I wish I had.
Right.
Which is tough for all of us. That's not an easy thing. But instead, just to be able to say, Lord, thank you for the successes they are having, right? Praise be to you for everything that they've done. I hope that their successes ultimately go on to bring you glory and honor in their lives. If they've got issues that I can't see, be with them, right? And help them. And if I can be a part of that, allow me to do so, right?
That makes me think of, I think it starts in Exodus 15 where the Israelites start grumbling. First it's about water. We don't have water. I mean, Exodus and the Israelites grumbling, it's like what the book is full of. But, they're grumbling about water. Then they get water. Then they're grumbling about food. And they're saying these things like, oh, I wish we had just died in Egypt, when we had tons of delicious food and everything was better. Why did he not kill us then? And I do think it's tempting to have that Israelite attitude. I'm seeing other people with their, pots full of food.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't perceive that. And yet it was God's mercy and part of a much greater story
Right.
that the people were wandering in the desert.
Yeah. Comparison is the joy killer, right? And so it's like, in this instance, what are they comparing? It's not comparing, oh, I wish we were the Egyptians, us versus somebody who has it. It's actually us comparing ourselves to our former selves.
How we were back when we were slaves. That was so great.
Yeah, exactly. What? But we all do that to a certain extent. And exactly what you're talking about with aging, that's one of the ways in which we compare ourselves to our former selves.
That's right.
And rob the joys that we have now. But if you were to step back into that former self, just like as the slaves, you step back into slavery and what you were being abused physically, they were killing your firstborns. Like, it was terrible. If you go back to your 20s and you think about, what was I thinking about when I was in my 20s? How wonderful it's going to be when I'm in my 40s. And life is established, right? And I know who I'm going to marry, and I've got a family, and I've got my kids, and life's going to be career. Yeah, everything's going to feel so stable. All these questions that cause me anxiety are going to be answered, right? And then you get in your 40s and like, man, what it would be like to wake up and not be full of pain or feel like I could actually get a full night's sleep.
Oh, man.
Right. So comparison, either future idea of who you are or previous or to someone else, like that's the joy killer, right? That will cause the sort of complaining and grumbling.
That's right.
Right. And so just being able to be present where you are now, where your feet are planted and praise the Lord for it.
It's much harder to just be faithful to where God has you in this moment and just say, I'm going to be satisfied with where my lot in life that he's given me now. Yeah.
Well, we hope that this has been helpful to you. If this has been, feel free to subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at One Another Podcast. You can email us 1a@firstprescolumbia.org. That's 1a@firstpres Columbia.org. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.